as we go from like the exclusivity-based workplace to the activity-based workplace, that next will be the connectivity-based workplace, which, yes, will include like how connected am I to my rooms and I can book things, how connected am I to nature, which is very much a design and well-being kind of approach, how connected am I to my company mission, which is also really important for the kids these days, right? Alignment with purpose. That's already been like debated and solved as something that's really important. Connecting to transport in the future of cities and mobility, connecting to even learning opportunities, ways of helping others, but most importantly, like to each other as humans.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Open Source Workplace Interview Series. Today I'm very excited to have Phil Kirschner of WeWork with us today. I've known Phil for a while. He's been an inspiration to me. He's asked me some very intriguing questions that we'll certainly come to as we come through the interview. But if this is the first time coming across the video, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're notified of all upcoming and future videos. So Phil, how you doing? Great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here. As we've known each other a long time, and I will appreciate any opportunity to get to talk shop with you.
No, it's always good, Phil. Every time we talk, I always feel I'm a little more, I learn a little bit more, so it's always good. So thank you. So you started your career, you studied computer science. So how did you go from computer science into workplace?
Yeah, it's a very roundabout kind of journey with a couple of lucky breaks. I did study technology. I knew I never really wanted to be a developer and had done some specializations first in college and then as an intern around information security and technology risk. My recruiting fall out of college was September 11th, so it was September 2001 to start working in the spring of 2002. And my father very smartly was like, you know, all the jobs in New York where I'm from had evaporated. I figured I was supposed to go back and work at Ernst & Young where I'd been an intern, and that went away. But he said, you have security experience and cybersecurity is all the rage now. And you should probably put that to the top of your resume. And he was right. So like the second I did that, it changed the hiring landscape and I ended up going to the technology recruiting program at Credit Suisse. So I was part of their information security team for 5 years. Then in another lucky break, found myself in the expense and efficiency management group right around 2007, 2008, which was a great time to be doing expense management if you're in financial services. And that was just a connection through a mentor, somebody I had been paired with years before that was in that team now that said, I don't need an accountant, I need a problem solver. So I joined that team to look after largely professional services and consulting expenses, and then later technology expenses. When the head of the group said, you know, we spend this much on consultants, we spend this much on technology, and I could use your brain over here. And that's relevant because a couple years later, while I was still in that group and had gone to London for a year and taken a sabbatical and came back and was looking for something new, the CFO at the time had been on the receiving end of a consulting engagement from DEGW, the firm that I'm sure many of your viewers and listeners and readers are familiar with because they basically wrote the book on workplace strategy. And to the CFO's credit, having gotten a full global rundown, surveys and interviews and focus groups and utilization studies, the whole gamut, was recommended by the consulting team to try full mobility workplace. Like, you should rip the Band-Aid, have everybody share everything. It'll be complete chaos, but it'll be a lot better. And he said, sure, which was an amazing thing that he did. But he assigned the expense management group that I was in to run the project because he knew at the time that the corporate real estate department and their leadership just like was not into the idea of new ways of working. And they would bury it, or that the technology organization would try to do it, you know, from the computing side up, the HR organization would try to do it from the policy side, and it wasn't going to be holistic enough. So he signed it to this expense manager group that I was in, and the head of it said, hey, I think you might be good at this. You know, you've been doing change management programs around here related to technology and process change. So I knew the shared services teams, how to get stuff done and how to keep the lights on at the company. So I think you'd be really into this. We haven't funded pilots in the Americas yet, so it's going to be a lot of stakeholder building, and we need to divorce ourselves of the need to call consultants for proof. So DGW had done all this early stage, like pre-survey, and I think they maybe had done 1 or 2 posts of the early pilots. He's like, we can't keep going to the market to have to evaluate how we're doing and to measure the patterns and preferences of our employees. We said, again, like, you come from IT, you can help me with this. So my first job was not only to kind of reverse engineer the research framework and figure out how to do our own surveys and utilization studies and sort of business case measurement for the workplace program, but to get in tighter with the technology department to align their objectives and ours in the delivery of like holistic space. So it was always a little bit of, hey, you know, those IT guys, or like, you understand what they're talking about, they trust you. And shifting to a much more data-driven approach to workplace, because at a bank, you can't say, you know, red couch, blue couch. It's like, it's got to tick and tie out to do anything, even in a people program. So that was kind of the way in. But from then I have learned by doing entirely.
Yeah. No, it's pretty interesting. I think a lot of people who I've come across who've come to the real estate workplace world have come in a very convoluted way and kind of fell into it. And there is just this fascination, I think, that comes whenever you do get involved with it, because you directly impact people. And I think we all like to serve and benefit other people. So I've seen that trend quite a bit.
Yeah.
So obviously,
there's something about like doing information security. You tell people like, oh, don't share passwords and risk. And they're like, yeah, but you're talking about a system that I built. And then you get into cost management and they're like, oh, well, you know, I should be able to decide where to spend that money. And it hits me a little bit more personally. The second you talk about your office, your desk where you work, the reaction is so much more visceral and personal. I think anyone who gets close to that, it's like, oh, hang on a second. That's really interesting. This feels very different. And so it's much more engaging to dig into.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So you obviously went from Credit Suisse, then you moved to JLL. What was that like whenever you went from working within an organization, serving the organization, to an organization that is actually providing services to those type of customers or companies?
Yeah. I mean, I love Credit Suisse, got promoted however many times. At times probably thought I would never leave, but real estate projects are big and lumpy and don't come around very often. So I was deeply involved with their kind of headquarters project in New York. And then I just knew it was going to be a couple years before anything really big happened again locally. So started looking and got back in touch with a woman named Bernice Boucher, who had been at DGW and was now at JLL. And she was at DGW when the research was done for Credit Suisse. So I knew her through that. And she said something to me that I hadn't really heard before, that was definitely her strategy at the time in building that team at JLL, because it's really difficult to teach a lifelong consultant, someone who's always been on the service provider side, what it feels like to be an occupier, to be like truly in the client for those long haul programs. She goes, but I can make a practitioner into a consultant, especially around workplace. So she was at the time really trying to stack the deck and hired basically three of us in the same year and a bit. Me coming out of Credit Suisse, someone coming out of HP, and someone coming out of Capital One, who had built and run long-term workplace programs. And she's like, that story is really compelling, because you can look a client in the eye and say, again, it's not red couch, blue couch. It's like, I know the journey you're going to have to take to get approval, to go to the committee, to go to the next committee, to go to the steering committee, to get all this done. And that means from the beginning, you're thinking about the problem in terms of evidence and outcomes and change and sponsorship, not just aesthetic. And that was really compelling. So I said, you're kind of talking my language, and there's an opportunity to get involved. And what I never expected was just the sheer volume of clients I would come in contact with, like my awareness of things that were going on, even working or just being near the brokerage community at JLL, that even projects I wasn't involved with at all, you just sort of hear this chatter of like tenants in the market and who's going here and what buildings are going up. And I said, when I left JLL, I remember like Credit Suisse made me a workplace practitioner, but JLL made me a functioning credible real estate professional. And I never knew in advance like how powerful that would be. So I'm super glad I did it. And I loved everything about getting to see all those clients and like their journeys at such a global level. It's completely different perspective.
So, I mean, we'll just sort of digress. We'll go back to then how you moved from JLL to WeWork. But just given the things that you've said to me there, so a lot of people at this time of year are contemplating what next steps may be, and as they evaluate their career, um, would you say there's a preference given working as an occupier, working within an organization, or as a service provider to those? In essence, for if people are thinking about long-term evaluation, long-term growth, long-term experience within the industry, what would you give as guidance?
Maybe C, something in the middle. So there was the interesting hybrid model was the people that were working for me and on the broader team at JLL who were consultants but embedded.
Mm,
And the way we pitch, I'd say, hey, here's someone who's going to come for a year or two and either run a long-term change program or be part of your strategy development. And like they're credible on their own. They've come from somewhere that's given this experience, but while they're on their weekly calls with you and on the ground and working in your office, they hear the chatter. They have access to all of these other people that are working with all of these other clients that are coming across these problems and are seeing different parts of the industry and best practice. So their like pervasive awareness is very powerful. You could sort of say the same thing with WeWork and community teams and saying like, oh, why should I use a community manager from WeWork as opposed to just like hiring someone? I said, because they hear tens of thousands of other members worth of stories in their ear all the time. So being on that line is really powerful. But going forward, like in the future, I think the reason I enjoyed staying at Credit Suisse and being part of that long-term program and other client side and embedded folks that I know is you have to inherently be there a long time to see the result of the thing that you did.
right.
And if you can break that model, if the real estate program itself is moving faster, if I'm a large occupier and I'm digging into workplace as a service or co-working, flexible office, or even just some form of shared office or mobility program in my own turf, the faster things are turning over, like the more data that you're getting and the more you're seeing you're going in the right direction. So actually, that's the thing that's really motivating.
Yeah.
And if I could go back to an occupier and see their portfolio changing in like workplace decisions, and there's no fear against measurement on a regular basis of everything from utilization to sentiment, like that could keep me super engaged for a long time. But if it's come here, make one big decision, wait a long time while it gets built for one big measurement point, people will get board, who I think are the highest performers in sort of the workplace space. So then if you can't get it on the occupier side, that makes it compelling to still be close to a service provider who sees more clients moving slowly, but concurrently. So at least there's like more events that you see. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely does. Absolutely does. And it's a great answer. I always like whenever you give people A and B and they choose C. So that's good. Thank you. I appreciate it. What is it they say? If you're given an option, take both, right? So there you go.
Right, both.
There you go. There you go. So, so JLL to WeWork, that was a big move for you. Where did that come from? What incentivized you to do?
Yeah, I mean, I was and remain smitten with JLL and everybody that I worked with there, and was like happy and clipping along. JLL was not and still is not like on my resume. And someone from our workplace strategy team actually left senior associate to go to WeWork's super early stage enterprise sales team when there were like very, very few of them. And he's in Chicago and then moved here. So I came to catch up with him and have a coffee because like I knew a lot about WeWork and co-working from relationships with other companies and just the news, but my clients were asking like more and more sophisticated questions about WeWork specifically, but then also co-working generally. And I wanted to learn more. So I came to have coffee with him at the headquarters where I'm sitting. And in addition to catching up, we like nearly physically bumped into a guy named Dave Fano that was running growth at the time, had come to WeWork through the acquisition of a company and started called Case. And my friend said, hey, like you two would get along really well, just intellectually. You should come back, Phil. So I said, great, I'll come back. So we set up a time to meet a couple weeks later, and I came in here for sure thinking, I'm going to sell WeWork consulting services because that's my job. And he very clearly was like, this is an interview, which I was not prepared for in any way. and remember thinking at the time, like looking around and seeing the employee base being so young and not a lot of faces that I recognize from a real estate perspective, thinking like, you guys aren't a serious real estate company yet, and going after enterprise is going to be really difficult because you're going to need a different level of credibility. But then I started seeing more and more names and running into people who I knew from New York, from financial services, and going, oh wow, you're like a real person, and that's cool. So that definitely changed my perspective, caused me to learn a lot more, interviewed with a bunch more people, and then eventually got hired to start the workplace strategy practice without ever having given WeWork my resume, which again didn't even have my current employer on it at the time, and there was no job description. So that was very, very different than the process I was accustomed to in two different, 50,000 employee or more companies with a super structure, especially the Swiss one.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting, and it's wonderful how these things just happen. And I'd love to have seen your face as you come in to try and sell something, and actually, and you go, "Oh, this is an interview." Oh, there,
Yeah.
okay.
Right. Yeah. It's like, oh gosh, like what is happening?
Yeah. So as we take a step back and let's have a look, sort of big picture, right? So obviously, with all your experience and everywhere you've been, what would you say is the future of
Workplace. Well, the message that I've been giving recently is that like most of the conferences that I go to, most of the articles that I go to, most of the passion that I see in the practitioners that I know, still very much focused on like the advent of activity-based workplace, and so many companies that are still coming, especially in the US, from low density environments, high office rates, low utilization. What I sort of recently coined for a presentation is the exclusivity based workplace. Like I exclusively work here. This room was built exclusively for one purpose, and only the exclusive upper management get the giant offices. Like it's all about restriction in use and focus to a degree on productivity. It was like I make boxes to put people in that can do the rank and file job of the normal company. And now activity-based working is still very much the rage. Like it is not new. The people 10 and 20 and 30 years ahead of me in this industry who pioneered the concept a long time ago are really starting to see material improvement and wider adoption of those design principles. But it's still very much about like supply and demand of diversity of space types to match a more complicated set of activities that the employees are doing now, especially in like knowledge workers. And because workplace effectiveness surveys are deciding like no one spot is good for everything, even the person with the private office like suffers from something. But that's now. It's not like what's next. And most of the chatter out there is about like, oh, it's experience, it's hospitality workplace, it's smart buildings, it's wellness. And I was really struggling to figure out like, how do you encapsulate all that into something that I, as a practitioner, someone who has to deliver a workplace in the future, will know that I'm actually doing the right thing? You can assess yourself on the delivery of activity-based workplace because you can run sort of workplace effectiveness surveys. I think focus is really important. My current environment does not provide me focus. I go to a new environment, hooray, I can focus. Hooray, I can connect with my colleagues. Hooray, leaders are more accessible. Like that is an assessment. And that's where my brain goes to. But you can't assess experience in that same way because experience as a term is very biased towards your perspective. If you are a technologist, all the experience articles today are about smart buildings. If you're like a service provider in food industry, it's like hospitality. You got to have a barista. If you're into fitness, wellness, it's like got to have a gym. You should do yoga classes and all this, little bits of cultural confetti, transport, perks, any kind of services, concierge, you name it. Like they're all amazing and experiential, but again, it's difficult to assess them, and they leave out huge swaths of what we think of in the future of real estate and architecture and design. So my run at it recently has been, the WeWork informed version of experience is the kind of shared conscious past of a community, which is to say, like, I experience things by myself. It's great. We experience things together. That's better. So the stronger the community you have, the greater the experience will be. And what I've proposed is that as we go from like the exclusivity-based workplace to the activity-based workplace, that next will be the connectivity-based workplace, which, yes, will include like how connected am I to my rooms and I can book things, how connected am I to nature, which is very much a design and well-being kind of approach, how connected am I to my company mission, which is also really important for the kids these days, right? Alignment with purpose. That's already been like debated and solved as something that's really important. Connecting to transport in the future of cities and mobility, connecting to even learning opportunities, ways of helping others, but most importantly, like to each other as humans. So connection to me can be that umbrella term where you could actually assess how you're doing in the delivery of that workplace. And many of the other topics that are being discussed and presented, from universal design and our furniture, it's still like the improvement of the practice of architecture and design, and that should just happen. That doesn't make it the future of the workplace.
So yeah, no, absolutely follow you. So how do companies then assess what their future connected workplace looks like? So how, you know, obviously there are organizations who are in different points on that journey, but so how do the ones who are just starting at the base ground, how do they start to identify what tools, what tricks would you recommend on how they, in their approach that they should take to identify that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Like on the technical side, maybe it's more objective that there's like certain tricks that are kind of commercially available tricks. It's why like you walk into an office where you have to book space still like the old paper way or call an assistant. And anyone who's seen any modern office, your brain immediately is like, wait a minute, it is not very complicated to solve that problem. Why haven't you solved that problem? That's just table stakes. When it comes to sort of awareness and connection at the facility level, I don't know what the assessment question is, but again, you can see on the leading edge with buildings like the Edge, it is possible now with smart planning up front to, you know, not just like book, but be aware of like transit status around the building, to be aware of things like air quality and temperature, to have potentially some control over that, to have cleaners and facility services that are being directed in a little bit more of a smarter way, floors that could be shut, or people whose kind of assignment in a building in the future could be reallocated dynamically. That idea of, you know, the building shuts down a floor for Fridays when it knows the floor is not going to be utilized to, you know, save energy. Some of those I think could be objectively obsessed through those kinds of features and capabilities. But for the human side, it's just going to be going deeper with topics around like engagement and passion and voluntary show up. All the obsession today around utilization is still so skewed towards like, is the desk being occupied right now? A little bit gets into, is the person in the room? But the next step is really like, for someone who for sure does not have to be in the room, have they elected to be in the space? And with greater and greater levels of autonomy and agency to decide, like, do I even have to go into this building you just spent $100 million on? How do you measure how magnetic that community is? And design for spaces that are truly humming, which is going to require a lot of people to rethink the purpose of the space that's supposed to be humming in the first, you know.
Yeah, have you seen any evidence or research that points that actually the more that the teams come together in the physical environment, the productivity of the outcomes is somewhat improved, or is that just subjective, do you think?
I'm sure there is. I do find myself saying a lot that I'll put it this way. I had a client recently who, you know, we were laying out different scenarios to think about their space planning and just different levels of severity when it came to entitlement. You know, how important do you have to be to get an office, or how big is the desk? Like really basic, just step down of you need 100,000 feet, 80,000 feet, 60,000 feet, right? Like basic stuff. And someone said, like, why is all this density good for me? How am I going to take this and go back to the board or the steering committee and say, like, ta-da, we should take up less space to put people closer together, spaces closer together. And in trying to make the argument, we realized, we're like, well, you're thinking about it wrong, because there is no science, to my knowledge, that says that density, which is about the physical environment from a workplace perspective, is good for you. Density isn't good for you, but proximity is good for you. There are studies that say, it's the Allen curve, and like, we will only communicate and interact and like feel connected to people with whom we are physically close. And there's learning benefits and alignment with purpose and leadership visibility. I don't remember the details now, but there is a study that was done once that said something to the effect of like, the more that people physically see executive leaders, even if they're not personally interacting with them, like, they will feel closer to them.
Right.
So you have to put people more closer together. And then, because there are certain limits with how close we will physically sit, like in certain contexts, then you need the kind of activation and events and community over and above the built environment to move water through the system, like to get you engaged, to be moving, to pull energy to one place, where when you boost the level of connectivity, where it does really get to, and I recognize this is like a 2 or 3 step leap, which for a lot of people could be very complicated. But it's very easy to say, oh, I built this great new environment and like, we're so much more innovative. Like, that's not it. Like, innovation comes from ultimately things like psychological safety, where you are willing to speak up, willing to be wrong, willing to, poke someone that you don't know in a group and butt your head in and say, hey, I have this idea, or I heard you were working on this thing. And to know that even if you're wrong, like that you're not going to be crucified for it. And to get to that, you need like actual connection. You need to feel personally close with someone, not just like that we meet in a room all the time, but like, I know you as a human, so therefore I'm going to be much more likely to say something or engage you in a problem. So you've got to get if you solve for proximity and purpose, and you get a level of connection, which like requires some engineering and curation, you should, in theory, be able to unlock levels of creativity and innovation that were not possible before, which is like a higher order problem from just saying, I'm going to improve productivity, which shockingly no one has actually been able to do or prove at scale, like, ever. Yeah. So why keep going back to that?
Well, it's a valid point. I think we all aspire to it, right? And that's going to be the aspiration, right? You shoot for the moon and you get somewhere just beneath that, then hopefully you're on the right trajectory. But if you are sort of creating for purpose and proximity, how best are you to get at that?
So I think when I say purpose, my thoughts recently have really been around like, what is the purpose of the physical office that you have just built or you're trying to like sell to your employees? Because too many clients, you say like, why do you even have an office in Boston? The answer is like, because we have 500 employees in Boston and they have to go somewhere. Like, I guess that's true, but that's like not actually a purpose. Like, why does that office exist? And I know it's really difficult to do that, but the example I use, like, WeWork in New York, Grusafaston, like, is too big to fit in one of our own headquarters. So we have kind of scattered around the city a little bit. But this main the HQ in Chelsea, where I'm sitting, like, doesn't have a sign on the door, but might as well, that says like, the purpose of this building is like for a group. It is not for the individual. This is like an A+ solution for the community. It's like a strong B for just you. So if you've walked in this door knowing, looking at your calendar, like 75% of my day is going to be heads down on a spreadsheet or like on back-to-back one-on-one phone calls, like, there are places here that will support that activity, but we haven't put as much effort into those as we have into the things that were designed for rapid interaction, connection, collaboration, like problem solving by groups of individuals aligned primarily around growth, sales, marketing, the executive presence, like, which is to say the center of gravity for that energy is here. The center of gravity for like finance and for our HR organization and legal, like, are in other places. And those employees are here a lot. And the message is very much, we want you to want to be here as much as you want to be here. But we're very clear on like what bits of energy are here and how this building was designed for what purpose. And it's not all of them. Mm-hmm. And so many workplaces that we try to self-assess through effectiveness surveys are simultaneously trying to be perfect for individual focus as they are for social, informal conversations, innovation, hackability, and just like doing both in the same space where rent is expensive is really hard. So why, it's easier said than done, obviously, but like, why try?
Right.
Find the purpose. So then the people who are coming are a little bit more aligned, and then it's easier to design for that proximity of pulling the energy in that building towards central places through kind of design, technology, and activation.
Got it. So whenever companies are on this journey, the connected workplace journey, right? And what are the certain KPIs that you think are necessary to track so that they know they're on the right path? Is there specific ones that to you are, these are the key ones that I always want to know and I always want to track?
I'm not totally sure yet, like on the pure KPIs, but I do think that the loss is like how few workplace programs can actually demonstrate the impact of physical space choices on long-standing, very well understood, very well worded, basically engagement survey questions. Like no one has ever thought that like the physical space would move or could move the needle on a question like, do you trust your leadership? Or brand strength and employee net promoter score. Like that's not new, but those processes are still for the large part run and controlled by human resources organizations that, from my experience, almost none of try to connect to physical space decisions.
Right.
In part because the physical space doesn't change that often, but we were able actually to do that at Credit Suisse at the time, to kind of segment responses in the global employee engagement surveys to show like same cities, same departments, people who had been moved into not just new workplaces, but shared workplaces with significant amounts of change management and new technology, were like 5, 10, or 15-point improvements, largely around like enablement questions. Like, you know, can I find things? Am I closer to other people? We hadn't quite gotten to like trust level, but that was next. We're like, if we can show HR that space actually moves the needle on some of their key indicators in ways that their own programs and policies never could, would they then engage deeper and say like, well, like let's take a look at the whole set and ask that same question of how do we test this kind of thing? And how do we test it quickly, which has always been the barrier for real estate. Like, if you wanted to take a run at how do I use my corporate environment to boost the trust in leadership, it's like a 4-year project. You're right. Like, oh, I got to find a city, then I got to convince someone to come out of their office, and then instead of going to the co-working or serviced office market, which I've been advocating for a lot, even before I got to WeWork, say like, try something. If it doesn't work, you can undo it. You can fail fast with real estate and workplace in a way now that you couldn't ever really years ago.
Yeah, feel fast is scary though, right? It's expensive sometimes.
It is expensive. Same, Bernice, who hired me at JLL, who had also been on the client side and spent a long time with Deutsche Bank in particular, said, if you're a corporate real estate group, you get a black eye for something, a black eye lasts for a decade.
Yeah.
Like, you are living with that choice and that expense for a long time. And yes, like serviced office co-working approaches like can be expensive in the moment, but they don't carry that long tail, right?
Yeah.
And they're expensive when you try to customize and deliver space in a flexible context that is to the exact same specification that you do under your own lease. But when you're just like trying something and you find groups that are willing to kind of pilot new ideas, and you don't go all the way, like you're willing to take something off the shelf and just try to like monkey with a layout or monkey with like who's in or not, and is someone across the street or in the same building. Like, I think there's ways of doing that in a really cost-effective way if you've made the case for knowing if this shows promise, that could have, a tens of millions of dollars impact on that big looming thing we have out there. And that's always obviously a challenge.
Yeah. No, that's good context. It really is. So the last question I like to ask everybody is, what is the one piece of advice or guidance you would give based on your own experience or what you've seen for those that did want to maximize workplace productivity and employee experience?
Choice and autonomy around both your own environment but other environments, and start to consider how, instead of solving for the masses, like giving certain groups agency to make a space decision on their own that don't necessarily have to be with the group or in the same building, something that might like totally unlock their productivity, creativity, like talent attraction, retention, to not be afraid of that. And that really more than anything else, the answer to most of the questions around experience and ultimately connectivity is that it is a labor of OPEX, not CapEx.
Yeah.
And if you build it, they will not just show up. There are many big, beautiful spaces that sit empty because there's nothing compelling about them.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned at WeWork especially is like, you need to turn it on. Our design approach of putting central social spaces first, like it's literally the thing you walk into first, it puts a huge premium on like, well, then this space can't be terrible because it's your first impression. And if I go back to Credit Suisse and a lot of my like financial services clients, a lot of them have amazing, beautiful, call it lounge or pantry, cafe, something, but they're buried like way in the back of the workplace. And therefore it's like, someone goes to eat or there's coffee, but it's not active. So when you put it first, it forces you to activate it. And for sure, that's not cheap. But it's creating a kind of environment where CEOs from some of our largest clients like walk in and their first reaction is literally like, what is happening here? And why don't I have what I'm experiencing in this moment at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday happening in my office? And as the office footprint shrinks in density, and presumably you're saving on the capital expense and the rent, you have to put that back into the software in the space, because those events, community teams and things that are happening over and above the physical plant can actually be much more responsive to user changing demands than the built environment. To swap out chairs still takes like a couple of weeks. To say, we did Yoga Wednesday and nobody liked it, they would prefer something that was more educational. You can make that decision week to week to week, right, without having to move anything. So that's what I would say. It's the focus on the OPEX.
No, it's. I actually love it, and I do believe in that connectivity, the social cohesion, and it's sort of build for those things. I totally buy into that, Phil. So look, thank you, Phil. I really appreciate you spending time. Is there anything you want to touch on before we go? I hate to leave people with something left unsaid. That they don't quite get to finish the thought. So.
No. This is really wonderful. I don't think I have, I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm just looking forward to other peers trying to find some ideas that are a little bit more provocative now, and more direct at the occupier side. Like, what, to your point, what do I have to solve for now? Instead of just assuming that like all the solutions are easy technology plays or like some new policy around home working, or even just like new chairs, or, you have nap pods, like all that is confetti. And I'm very interested in finding out like where I'm wrong, having someone show me a better mousetrap, and hearing something that really makes me knocks me off my axis again, my new ways of working.
All right. Well, great, Phil. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending time with us today.
My pleasure.